Hi, my name is Teresa Quinn, and I'm a social worker with the National Ovarian Cancer Coalition. And today, in this grief and loss section, we're going to talk a little bit about what is a grief ritual and how to create one for yourself that is incredibly adaptable and fluid and sustainable for you so that you actually can process your own grief and loss while the world continues to spin and life continues to go on, responsibilities continue to go on. So you may be watching this video because you are grieving the loss of somebody in your life, somebody that you either, took care of, or a friend, or somebody that you probably loved really dearly. You may also be watching this as you're kind of reframing your own cancer experience and through the lens of loss and understanding how grief plays into your experience. You may also be, kind of in a different stage of your experience, maybe no longer in active treatment, and really processing, looking back at your entire cancer experience from diagnosis onward through that lens of loss, and really grieving a lot of the losses that are present for you throughout that cancer experience. So really this idea of a grief ritual, it's meant to be kind of a dedicated space for you to be able to just be with and to be really present to the emotions, the bodily sensations, the thoughts and feelings that came and that come with your grief. So a grief ritual, we want it to be personal for you, right? So it's not necessarily a cookie cutter process, but I want to offer some guidance around structure and what can be supportive for you. But I want you to think about what can be really most sustainable for you over time, similar to how we talked about in the coping skills section. It's not necessarily just a general list of try this thing out and see what happens, right? We want it to be something that you can play around with and get curious about, but that ultimately really feels like it fits for you. So feel free to take what you need from these suggestions and really adapt it to what your life looks like, because that's how it should be. So when we think about grief ritual, again, it's just about carving out that space for yourself to allow your grief some space to be, right? And to be able to be present with it. Oftentimes, after we're experiencing a loss, whether that is the loss of a person or all the losses that come with a diagnosis and, the major life change that comes with an ovarian cancer diagnosis, there's a lot of losses that go along with that. And unfortunately, we oftentimes get swirled into the very logistic heavy and bureaucratic heavy world of treatments and insurance and doctor's appointments, right? Or if we're grieving the loss of somebody, we, get a certain amount of bereavement leave, and then responsibilities kick back up oftentimes. And so really this idea of grief ritual is a way to carve out time to be. So one suggestion is to roll out, a yoga mat or put a blanket on the ground. And if that's not accessible for you, of course, pick your favorite chair or corner of your sofa, whatever feels kind of most supportive for you. But I like the idea of having something that you roll out, right? Or that you create something that has some boundaries, right? So it's not just the same spot on your couch that you watch TV at in the evening, right? It's really creating some intentional times because you're cueing to your nervous system, oh, I'm about to drop into this space here. So even if it's just like laying a new blanket out over that cushion on the couch is totally fine. That's kind of why I like the yoga mat or the blanket, just like having some corners to feel a little bit more contained in your own experience. So create kind of that space for yourself. And ideally, bring something with you that represents your grief. That could be a photo of the loved one who has passed. It could be, something that reminds you of your treatment experience. It could be something that belonged to somebody that you love dearly and miss dearly. It could be a photo of yourself from 5 years ago, for example, and you're missing who that person was before that diagnosis. Could be anything that represents that grief and loss to you. Ideally, like something visual or like tactile. So that way you can look at it, you can touch it, you can feel it, and you can just be with it. And I'll invite you to set a timer for this. There's a couple of reasons why. The first and most important one being we want, again, to cue to your nervous system. And we'll have lots more information about nervous system in general in the trauma section. We want to cue to your nervous system that this will not last forever, right? Oftentimes we can become a little bit fearful of engaging with certain emotions, and grief is a whole host of emotions, right? We can be kind of fearful of it because it feels like, well, if I go there, I'm never going to come out of it, right? It's a deep, dark hole that I'm going to fall into. And the reality is we want to be able to give your nervous system some boundaries similar to the mat, some time boundaries to understand this is not going to last forever. The timer will go off. We will be able to shift from this. So that way you can actually sink into it and know that there is going to be a cue to pull yourself back out. So set a timer. I recommend it being like a really gentle timer, just being aware, if you're setting it on your phone or an egg timer or something, how it would feel, kind of if it might feel a little jolting to come out to a really loud noise. So set a timer, can start with 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and let yourself simply feel that loss. So that's why an object bringing with you can be really helpful to be able to kind of root yourself in an experience. You can drop in and just check in. How am I feeling about this grief? What needs to happen? What needs to shift and move with that? And it may be crying for 10 minutes, right? It could be slamming your fists on the ground or into a pillow, screaming into a pillow. It could be saying everything that you would want to say that you didn't get a chance to say, right? Or that you felt like it's kind of still locked in there, right? And again, it's just in really small bursts to be able to give yourself almost like a little pressure valve release. And then when that timer goes off, I want you to, roll up the mat or the blanket or kind of come out of whatever the space is that you carved out for yourself, and then move your body in some way, shape, or form. Doesn't have to be a long exercise format. Go for a walk around the block, right? Or if it's, midwinter and you live somewhere cold, open the window, get like really cold air coming in, and just take a couple of deep breaths and just lift your arms up and over your head a couple of times, right? Move your body in a way that feels sustainable for you, but that also allows some of that energy that you created through that grief ritual to move out of your body, right? Because it can feel a little bit trapped in there sometimes. So even something as simple as like swinging your arms up overhead and then back down again, it's like with increasing speed, can sometimes offer that. Jogging in place or marching in place is another great example. A gentle stretch is also completely fine, but move your body in some way, shape, or form. So that's one suggestion, right? Roll out a mat, bring an object that represents your grief, set a timer, let yourself feel into it for that amount of time, and then move your body afterwards. But really, I want you to think about how you want to create your own grief ritual that works for you. So for some people, it's thinking about, I've worked with folks that, their spouse died and their spouse really loved coffee. And so even though they weren't a coffee drinker, they made a cup of coffee in the morning, they sat down and they just wrote to their spouse what I would say to you this morning if you were here, right? So they're writing in a journal. They're taking 2 sips of coffee that is really not their taste, but it represented their spouse, right? And then they were able to kind of move forward with their day. And those kind of check-ins offer a little bit of spaciousness and a little bit of time to be with your grief, because oftentimes it's going to feel like it's kind of right here. It's right on your shoulder. It's right with you at all times. And so we want to be able to attend to it in the ways that it needs. So think for you about what works. Maybe it is that cup of coffee in the morning. Maybe it's the yoga mat ritual. Maybe it's something like, spending time in a garden, right? And really this idea of like getting your hands dirty, representing something about like your grief in your life. So I want you to notice what would feel authentic for you. Oftentimes that tactile component, writing, creating art, taking photos, reading out loud, having kind of a full sensory experience with it can offer some of that movement that needs to happen. So with that, I'll invite you to create your own grief ritual. Practice it every day if you can, ideally a couple of times a week, and just start to notice how it feels to have a little bit of that pressure valve release, a little bit of that space that you're making time for yourself.